So we are actively recording. I figured out, or for some reason my Chromebook is now displaying video, so that's good. And the topic for this week, we covered a little bit last week in terms of just saying who the major players were and talked a little around operating systems. We're going to delve a little deeper. In last week, we looked at hardware from a sort of ground up, basically this component does this component does this, and this is how they work together. Knowing that helped you troubleshoot hardware and compatibility issues for a computer, which when you're adding assistive technology, that's not bad information to have, frankly. And possibly having to do upgrades and other things of that nature, especially if you have clients for which finances are a challenge. I mean, I don't know what different people do or do not have to do, but I know that I've done some consult work just on my own with people, and I've ended up upgrading their machines just because I could do it a lot cheaper. And my concern was getting them trained up, so I could just borrow their machine, get it put back together, bring it back to them. And because my interest was getting them access to technology, I tended to do it a lot cheaper than hiring a geek squad or any of those other things. I don't know. I haven't used them much, but I know when like my phone breaks or something and I have to take it somewhere, yeah, it's not a small piece of chump change to deal with. So this week we're going to take a very similar look, but we're going to look at it from the point of view of GUI-based user interfaces, graphic user interfaces, and we're going to start building up this week that content that you interact with on the screen, the actual user interaction interface of the computer, and also where some of the settings and what the different components of different operating systems are, because when it comes to compatibility, we're in this transition now where people are trying to make the root machine far more accessible, and there's a little less assistive. And for those of you who weren't, I don't know, we'll cover those finer details very soon. We didn't cover the AT thing, right? That's next week. Yeah, it's next week. The word AT has come to have multiple meanings now, and from an operating system level, if it's out of the box, it works, then that's what more people are driving towards. So we need to become far more familiar with the built-in tools of machines. That's why I'm toting around Chromebooks right now. When it comes to me as an individual doing it, Jason, to answer your question, he says, what about the liability part of updating the machines? Most of the time I've been doing it as an independent contractor, and I've been taking that liability upon myself to do that. I haven't been doing it under the auspices of any rehab facility, school, or anything of that nature. So that's just been an agreed upon, assumption of me doing it between me and the client. Yeah. No, and that's an excellent question, because that's a really important question. I'm glad you asked it. And that's just when I'm working outside the box, which is frankly a lot more frequent than I would prefer, despite what everyone who knows me thinks. So this week we're going to talk mostly operating systems and software, and we will round in a little bit at the end on general principles of universal design, which is a very important subject to broach, because universal design is going to be a big part of what Acadis interacts with. And we need to have a grip on the theory and the practice of universal design so that we can explain it, because a lot of people, frankly, don't get it, but I'll share stories when we get there. So talking about operating systems. our major players in desktop operating systems, and we looked at these numbers at the end of last class. For those of you who just joined, at the end of the video for last week or at the end of the slides, you will see the market numbers of use of different operating systems and the new sales. So we kind of ended last week with a preview of this week of this is the world we live in now, and oh look, this is the world we might be living in the future, with the way things are adjusting and changing. So the major players are Windows, Mac OS X, Linux, which ostensibly right now is it's a small part of the market anyway, but it's mostly Ubuntu. I'm not gonna go against anyone who says, but I use, cool, you do you. But a lot of the major market player that's pushing out there, and also the one that happens to have built-in accessibility, is Ubuntu. And then we're really looking at Chrome in schools. I don't know, you guys can tell me, but I haven't heard anything about businesses operating from a Chrome-based interface. Has anyone seen, I don't know, maybe there is Chrome for business? I don't know. Maybe Google uses, their client, all their personnel use Chromebooks. I'm not sure. But has anyone heard anything from the business world? Okay, Trish says only in schools. Ditto for me. There's a transition play, and it's the same transition play that Apple did. Right, not Chrome browser, and that's an important distinction, Diana. She says she has to use Chrome to log into this class. Not the Chrome browser, but the Chrome operating system. So it only runs really on a Chromebook. It's licensed to a few companies like Acer, Asus, I think has one. There's a few of them. And so it's a very different interface, and everything is like Chrome, everything, Docs is all built in. Yeah, and a lot of people aren't, Diana, and that's part of another dilemma, frankly, especially for TVIs, because a lot of our software is added on, and Chromebooks are built so that all the software that gets added on is very similar to an iPad or any of those other things, where you have to do it through the store, right? And we all know that you don't go on an online store on Google and download JAWS. It's not going to work. But yeah, the tablets, mobile OSs, and that's the other thing, is like our major players, thank you for the segue, Diana, because she said and tablets too, is in the mobile market are Windows, iOS, and Android, of course, which Android is the Google product. And I know the Windows tablet is out there, but certainly they are not a major part of market right now. And Windows has tried to move into that. Frankly, I think they initiated that market with their touchscreen laptops type stuff, and they kind of created that, but it never took off until the iPad kind of gave all of its fanfare. So when talking about a desktop machine, and a full-on desktop operating system, so those are our Chrome, Ubuntu, Windows, and Mac OS X. There are common features of the operating system. What's happened is within all technology, we always get a disruptive technology, a technology that's just different from everything else. Case in point, you say Mac OS, the original Mac OS, back like the old boxy Mac, all in one, 3.5 discs, right? GUI interface. Oh my God, it changed the world. and then you get other people coming into that market, and then those markets play against each other until eventually you end up with what is truly called a convergence. You know, you end up with a little bit of divergence, some disruption, and then you end up with convergence, where all the technology starts to move into the common features. It's a very evolutionary process, frankly, because people try things all over, and users like some things, don't use other things, and they voice their opinions, right? Consumer market. And eventually all the people wants to sell the things, and so they converge in. A perfect case in point is screen readers, right? Mac produced or Apple produced voiceover, and they're like, hey, we're so cool, we did voiceover. And yet each generation of voiceover, you got more and more of the familiar features from JAWS and Window Eyes. The one being the numpad navigator, right? Is what they call it. It's just using the numpad to navigate. It's one of the oldest things in the book when it came to using a screen reader. And more all of those things are looking the same. Right now, the same thing is happening with Google's Chromevox on their Chromebooks. Is they did some different things with their approach to accessibility. And more, their features are moving more towards the center, the common ground that the existing partners have created. NVDA adding trackpad navigation was an adoption from VoiceOver on the Mac OS side. So it all happens. But suffice it to say, within an operating system, we have certain common features. And the first one being the desktop. And the desktop is that space. When you turn on the computer and there are no programs running and nothing's there, it's that space in front of you. It can be incredibly locked down so that nothing ever appears in that space. It can be completely open, so you may have a bunch of shortcuts and a hard drive and a trash and everything else in there. Your desk may be clean. There may be nothing in front of you. The only reason my desk is clean in front of me is because I have these little pullouts on my desk, and I have another desk behind me. Or, and Trish says, or cluttered. And in reality, I think it's important to note here, as we all will probably be troubleshooting computers at some point, and probably troubleshooting computers running assistive technology, which is a RAM-intensive thing. It requires a good bit of RAM for the computer to do that. It's important to know that the desktop is one of those places on your machine that is always running, okay? Modern computers will shift some tasks to the background. Most of the operating systems never fully shift the desktop, which is kind of your root operating system, to the background fully, which is to say, if you have like 40 documents on your desktop, that's actually going to slow down your machine, especially with modern hard drive indexing, like what Mac computers have. They are constantly indexing the hard drive. That's why Mac computers don't have a defrag, actually. Everybody knows that, right? And because it's always defragging, it's always indexing and reorganizing the hard drive. And as a result, it's always checking in on those things on the desktop to make sure they're all fine and they're all okay and nothing's changed. Well, that requires memory. Likewise, if you have like, and I'm gonna play hooky and point out my wife's way of using a computer, because of course I am the IT guy in my family. You know, she generally, when she teaches, she shares a lot of YouTube videos, different websites and resources and everything. So at any given time, she generally has one Safari window open that has about 13 tabs. That's a huge drain on your computer's resources there. So that sort of stuff tightens things up. The desktop is that core space. Now, besides your desktop, which, if you're running Windows, that is your Windows. That's kind of the space of your operating system. If you're running Mac, it's your Mac. If it's whatever, it tends to be the desktop is that workspace of your operating system. Another important feature are your settings. And I love settings. I think on Mac it's called System Preferences, right? On Chrome, it's called, where is it? Settings. On Windows, I think it's, are they control panels? They're still control panels on Windows, right? And I think in Ubuntu, they're settings. I laugh at this because back when I started using Mac, back in 1990, when I started using Mac OS, when I had to go from Apple basic DOS to GUI interface, the Mac OS, they were called control panels. And when I first started using Windows, they were called System Preferences. And I don't remember what date it happened, but at some point in like the early 2000s or something, or mid 2000s, all of a sudden Apple started calling it System Preferences and Windows started calling control panels. They do this stuff and it drives me nuts because if they would all just pick the same word and use it, that would be fabulous. But the settings are where all of the different features, your display settings, how to treat your keyboard, how fast your mouse cursor moves around the screen, whether your mouse cursor gets bigger, which you guys who can see the video of the window, you can see my mouse cursor going back and forth, and then you see it disappear. Interesting feature of screen sharing is when your mouse cursor is enlarged, that accessibility system setting kicks in on a Mac OS, it doesn't screen share, which means it's living somewhere else. So all of those things, and anymore, that's where your cloud-based stuff, your email settings sometimes live in there on some computers, your sound card, your headset, just everything. And being able to navigate and knowing where things are in the settings is probably one of, in my opinion, the most challenging jobs for us, because every time an operating system comes out, invariably, that new shiny operating system, they move all the settings. They put them all somewhere else, or they rename them, or they decide that, you know what, that's really not the optimal place for that setting. We're going to put it over here. Feel free to, say amen if you've ever been through this, because I've been doing tech training on operating systems and AT long enough that every time I'm going to teach something, I set an hour aside to go through all of my slides that I know cold, because I do this stuff daily, and go back through the new operating system and check that everything's where it's supposed to be. It was really maddening in the early days of VoiceOver, which is what I spent a lot of time doing. And they completely, and I couldn't update. That's back when you had to pay to update the operating system, right? I'm doing these volunteer teacher trainings at conferences and stuff. I'd have to shell out $100 to upgrade the operating system so that I can drive halfway, across my state or two states and give a training for somebody for lunch. And they moved everything. I wasn't giving people up-to-date information, or I'd share the most up-to-date information, and the school is running an older version of the operating system. I bring all this up because like my university here at Northern Illinois University, we're certainly not on OS 10 here. And I don't expect our university to go to OS 10 for a while. I've requested one OS 10 upgraded machine because as I'm teaching things, if I'm looking at listservs and other boards, I can't stay on top of everything if I don't have a completely up-to-date machine to emulate the behavior to test everything out. So that was part of why that assignment existed for last week, was keeping you attentive to knowing what operating system, what your system data is, what your memory, RAM, all that stuff is, because it all plays different. And the more we go into schools, corporations, businesses, the more people have autonomous control over their computers, the less likely they're going to Best Buy and buying whatever's off the shelf every 2 years, the longer we're living with these older operating systems. And again, we saw that at the end of last week. Now, after settings comes the really fun stuff, which are the utilities. And this kind of goes back to Jason's earlier questions, like, how do you do that without liability? I want to reiterate his question, because when you start messing around with settings, you may not be messing with physical anything. I'll tell you a story. People say after they've taken this class and they've listened to the videos over and over, they feel like they really know me. My daughter brought me one of our iPads in our house yesterday, and I have 2 children in my home. My 21-year-old's out, but I have a 10 and 8-year-old, and my 8-year-old, who thinks he's too clever for words, had changed the password because he could never remember it on the iPad. And he changed the password, and of course, like a true 8-year-old, he couldn't remember it. And so he entered it in 6 times, and what happened? When you enter a password in on an iOS device 6 times, it gets locked out. Not only is it locked out, but the newer version of the iTunes, I have it's an iPad 2. It's an older iPad. And the newer version of iTunes, I actually have to go to an older machine because iTunes won't recognize a device unless you put in the numeric code and it's unlocked. So if you have an iPad 2 on the newest version of iTunes and it gets locked out, that device is done. You've got to reset it, everything on it. You have to go back to an older version of iTunes that was in sync with that version of the OS, so that it will auto unlock it. Whoops. So those utilities are no less dangerous when you start messing with some of these settings on the computer. People talked about BIOS, and there was a video last week about BIOS. You can really mess with stuff. But utilities have some very useful tools. They have, your disk first aid. I mentioned earlier they have things like defragmentation, where it'll defrag your drive. And I'm pretty sure, like, we talked a little bit about solid state drives versus a hard disk. But if you're using a old school hard disk that actually spins, defragmentation is actually a really important process. It makes your computer faster. It uses all of your system more optimized. It's also important to note that if you delete something on your computer, and this has come up a little more in the news lately, so I think people are a little more aware of it, and probably this group highly aware of it, the data isn't gone, okay? When you delete something on your computer, you don't get rid of it. It's not like taking an eraser and erasing pencil on a piece of paper. All that's happening is the index file, the little like note-keeping Dewey Decimal System of your computer that tells the computer where to look for certain information. It's just going down that numeric list and erasing the entry that says where that data is. It forcibly forgets where that data is, and it marks that data space as blank. But if you can go in and read that data space, if you were to download everything from the hard drive and that little space of data came with it, the information is still there. The operating system just doesn't know how to find it if it needed to look for it. There's no arrow pointing where that data is, but it's still there. In order to actually take that data out, you need an additional program. And actually, I can't remember. One of the times I was teaching this, there was something in the news. I can't remember. It was probably during the election. Someone scrubbed their drive. Who was it that scrubbed their drive? And I was talking in this class that, like, that's not a normal thing. Like, if you're scrubbing your drive, you're intentionally going in, you know enough to wipe out all your data. And that's kind of an intentional thing. That's an extra step. Normal people don't scrub things, I don't think. I mean, I don't expect a lot of people in this class is going through and scrubbing their drive every now and then. That's a higher end utility. Your disk utility will kind of clean things up, organize information, will look for little file connections that are off so that your operating system will run a little better. You can also monitor, and I welcome everyone while I'm lecturing and teaching here. You know, you can go to your utilities, system utilities, and look at your system monitor. It's interesting to know what's, you're going to have to be sitting here in front of a screen, whatever. But it's interesting to know what's taking all the memory and what's running when your computer is sufficiently not doing a whole lot, right? You can pick up on whether or not you have viruses and other things. I've quarantined things back probably 15 years ago. I've caught worms and other things that way by looking at those system monitors, finding the things that are drawing that shouldn't be drawing, locating the file and pulling it. So those utilities offer very effective and useful tools. I bring utilities up because if we are teaching an individual how to use their computer because we want them to be more independent, we're using technology to foster independence. We've talked a lot about that, right? If we are not teaching them how to maintain the computer as part of that learning, we're making them dependent in order to be independent, and that doesn't make sense. It's not a lot to teach someone to go in, have a scheduled maintenance thing, run 2 programs on the first of the month or something, or every other month. Normally that'll do. And just let them know, set a reminder in their calendar, ask, your she who shall not be named from Amazon to remind you, hey, you should probably clean things up, or set a reminder in your calendar. Utilities are important. Settings are important for us to not only know about it, us to actively teach, because an individual can't customize their machine to their changing situation if they don't know where it is and how it works. They can't keep that machine running if they don't know where the utilities are and how they work. And their McAfee would be a virus, is a major player on the Windows side of virus detection and everything. So yeah, and a reasonably tested one. Tiffany's just saying our network security officer at work has us locked out of any major utility. Sure. And Tiffany, I don't expect you to do this to your work machine. We're not really talking about that. Here I'm probably talking more about adult services, because those people are getting machines and they're learning for their own independence out in the world. At the same time, we should probably have some sort of machine that we can teach juniors and seniors in high school some of this stuff from, so that they can know some of this. These controlled environments, if they're going to get their own computer, we don't want them to dependence to become independent. I mean, if you've got enough money that you can pay a tech person to come in every 6 to 12 months, get on with yourself, have fun. But if you don't, 1 or 2 lessons on going through these things scattered in is a good idea. He does, I can see not scrubbing things need to be archived, sure. Doesn't believe defrag is safe. That's really interesting, Tiffany, because really, I'm assuming you meant defrag, not degrag. But that's interesting because all defrag does, and I want to talk about this just very briefly. Whenever your computer gets new information, the utilities are important. And we're kind of going into that a little more, Ryan, is because we have to have people be independent. And I'm talking, we've kind of clarified more about adult services or juniors and seniors in high school. People are going to have their own computers. They need to be able to maintain them. The reason defrag, shifting over, Tiffany, is when your computer is writing new information, all right? Say your operating system is installed, and it's installed in one big chunk all the way around the drive. Think of a record, right? And then you write one little file, and just wherever the pin of the hard drive happens to be, it's just going to be like, oh, this is a free spot. I'm going to write it right there. And then write it right there. And then later on, you're installing a major program, like say you're updating Word, and it's trying to write Word all the way around, but it hits one of those files that's loaded in. So it's going to skip that square and go right behind it. Well, if it hits a lot of chunks like that as it's going around, wherever it happens to be, that means that your drive has to move in and out, in and out, in and out all over to grab all the pieces of that program so that then it can load it into the memory and go with it. When you defrag it, all it's doing is copying the items from one location to the other, those little bits of program from one place to the other, so that entire programs and type of files are all organized in groups, so that, you know, your computer knows, oh, I'm working with documents, go to this area of the hard drive and boom, there's all my documents. It can find stuff faster, and it also means that your programs run faster. If you happen to talk, Tiffany, with that person, I don't know, I'll do some reading, Tiffany. I'm very, well, and I wanted to share it for everyone. I'll see why people wouldn't like it. Sometimes IT has very peculiar reasons why they don't care for things. If they're archiving and they're concerned about archiving, though, if you delete a file and then you defrag, it can very efficiently serve as a poor man's scrub, depending on the size of the files you're putting in. There are ways you can use defrag as a scrub, so that might be their concern. Trish is saying, even if they're dependent on someone at school age, they can learn about it and remind their TBI or tech folks at school that it needs to be done. Often, if the student has a machine different than the rest of the kids, exactly, e.g. PC versus Chromebook, the school tech folks forget to keep their student's computer clean and up to date. I've seen it so many times. And I've taken that responsibility as a TVI in the school very often, frankly. So that's utilities. And I know it's really amazing, right? We're talking about common features of an OS, and there is this much to talk about. And yes, there is this much to talk about. Kevin's asking, so does the layman utilize scrub and defrag synonymously? That's a good question. I'm not a layman, so I don't think I would know. I said, and I just want to be clear, if you're clever, like my son, someday will be, you can use a defrag as a poor man's scrub by deleting a whole bunch of files, defragging it, and then filling up the hard drive with like multiple copies of the same video. It'll overwrite all the files and then deleting it again. There are poor man's ways of doing that if you really wanted to do that. But I don't know. That's a really interesting question, Kevin, given the nature of a lot of that political debate and everything that happened. So, but I want to move through the rest of this. So I'm watching my time, and I think I've got everything timed out right. Yeah, and Judy, I think, is responding to Trish about that whole admin rights. Yeah, too often. So after desktop settings, utilities, then we get that favorite thing called applications. And we talked last week. Applications are all the programs that do everything on your computer. They are the software on your computer. And at some level, when we were talking last week about hardware, yes, an operating system is software. It is that rootmost software that is running on your computer. It's still software. It's not necessarily an application, because an application is intended to run on that operating system, to display and interface and everything else in a certain fashion. So applications are your Office, your Skype, your web browsers, your email, all the things you run. I have web sharing software, I have drawing software, I have the application folders in my computer, Adobe, PageMaker. There's so much software running on our computers right now, and all at the same time. That is all of those applications. And more frequently, I mean, we're seeing a transition with the mobile operating systems having their own software stores. We're now seeing a lot of major operating systems on the desktop side prefer a download form. So much so that really, like your old Babbage's, I don't know, is Babbage's even around anymore? I can't imagine they have much to sell. Between Steam and the different stores, I think a lot of those like mall software stores, that was a thing in like the 80s and early 90s. But I've got to say, I haven't seen one in a long time. I see GameStops, but I don't see any of those other players. Most of the applications are loaded in that fashion, or downloaded straight from the internet. And we've got to remember that if you're downloading something from the internet, question everything. The other beauty of the software stores is they are screening the software. Before they put it on their store, hopefully they're doing some form of screening process to make sure it's not malware or this, that, or the other. Doug saying, I'll never forget the first time I spent over $100 for a piece of software and got only a card with a key. No book, no disc. What? I will one-up you, Doug. There was a game in the late 90s called The Stone. Did anyone ever see the game called The Stone? It was a little black pyramid box, and it was like, I don't know, $60. And it was a puzzle game, riddles and all kinds of other things that utilized the internet and everything else. And you open it, and all it was a necklace on a black cord, a little on a black cord necklace, and on the back of it were 6 hieroglyphs. And you went to the website and you put in those 6 hieroglyphs, and that was your registration key. I was like, what? I still have the thing. Well, and that's the beauty of it. Really, that's Doug said no overhead, and that's what started this transition. A lot of this transition was started accidentally by Walmart, where Walmart asked specific software providers who they were selling things for to create smaller packaging so that they could fit more of the stuff into a smaller space in the store. They didn't feel like they needed to commit that much floor space to the applications and software. So they asked companies to do it. One of the first companies, in fact, that went to the smaller packaging was Blizzard Software, which is a video game provider. Other people started to follow suit. it kind of went even further in that not long after that, some of those companies were like, well, why bother? We'll just sell it ourselves. And as internet speeds got better, that's become the trend. So applications are everything that downloads. After that, we have our file architecture. And file architecture is a really important concept because if you cannot see the screen to navigate, or you cannot clearly see it, having an underlying understanding of how the files in your computer are organized, out of the box, mind you, because once you start monkeying with it, it's totally different, helps you be more independent in managing and navigating your computer. And there was a trend that was started in, I'm going to have to say, right around early 2000s, where Apple and Microsoft both decided they wanted your computer, your desktop computer, to be your digital hub for life. And that's when both operating systems started putting out a sidebar in, like when you opened your hard drive, it was a sidebar interface that had your photos, your downloads, your applications, your files, your videos, your music, and all of that was organized in so that it was all there. Once you add your own folders, or you can actually change those features, right? And you can move them around, you can add new folders to them. Like on mine, I always, under those favorites, those default favorites, right? I tend to drag a couple of my Dropbox folders in there of projects that I'm most active in. Like when I'm working on this, there's a Vital Outreach folder, boom, right at the top on my desktop and laptop, where that's the first thing there because that's where I'm going 98% of the time. Modern computers also scan and organize and index the hard drives much more actively, which means that you can put stuff in your documents folder, right? That ambiguous documents folder. It used to be a really big deal that we taught file organization and file hierarchy on devices. In fact, I still taught it, even though I was seeing trends that for a while made me question how long we would have to do it, because I can, on any of my Apples, I can hit Command Space, and on a Windows machine you can go down there and hit search, type in the file name, or go to your recent items or things like that, and you can tend to get to your files very quickly in that fashion, even if they're just all dumped in the same folder. I began to wonder if there was going to be a day where us teaching this file hierarchy and architecture was going to become less so. And in the last couple of years, I'm recanting my belief that we would be teaching it perhaps less, or that the common person would do it less, because they can just search their drive real quick and pull it up. And I'm not sure about, since I haven't gotten to use Windows 10 a lot, I know within 8 it wasn't totally there. Do people know if you do a search on Windows 10, will it find a word inside a file? Okay, good. For a while, that was a difference between the two OSs. Like Mac looked inside the folder, and Windows just looked at the file name to organize it. And it's important because we organize our information and we expect a lot more from our computers. And being able, yeah, and thank you, Tiffany, not just documents, but email and Outlook and everywhere. Like it's just, you want to create a smart search record that dumps everything with certain words in it. You think this might be a crazy idea, you write a file up on it, you take some notes on it, you write a couple emails, and then all of a sudden, boom, it explodes. And the world's going nuts about this project. And you're like, I need to organize everything I've got here. So you do this active search for all the keywords of your project. And then, boom, the computer makes a folder for you that, again, organizes all your files for you, eliminating some of that need for that architecture hierarchy that we've been teaching for so long, so rigorously. I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence. I'm kind of recanting on whether this file architecture thing is a huge deal. I think we still need to teach it. We need to very intentionally teach it so people can organize things, because you have to have some form of organization of where your information is to get there. And when certain tasks are already more challenging because of the presentation of a GUI interface or the way information is provided, anything that makes you a little more efficient is pure gold. A file delete queue is in all of the operating systems as well. And it's important, you guys will notice, I choose the name for that very carefully. It is a file delete queue. When you put it in your trash can, your operating says, no, 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 I can't use it there anymore. It's in ew. I'm not touching that. I think there's diseases in there. Not doing it. If you want to use that, take it out and then you can play with it. But as long as it's in there, I ain't touching it. It's not gone generally until you empty the trash or recycle bin or whatever, compost. I don't even know, folks. At the end of the day, it's just your file delete queue. I mean, I remember changing the graphics of that when I was in high school with ResEdit. But we already talked back in utilities when talking about defrag and scrubbing that it's just deleting the arrow that points to where things are. The last one is our navigation conveniences. And I kind of talked that a little bit in applications. That's those sidebars or your dock, or your side dock, or your app chooser, or any number of those things. Different operating systems have a lot of different approaches to it. That it's just some form of convenience that allows you to get to stuff a little more. And it's important to know navigation conveniences, whether they be hotkeys, the go button, your Windows key, shortcuts on the desktop. It's important to know all of them because you never know which one is going to be most functional and favored by a client. And as such, we need to kind of expose them to a lot of them. And then we need to let them play with them, introduce another one, and after 3 or 4 weeks, come back and go, can you just do this for me real quick? Do this, give them 3 or 4 tasks, see how they do them. And then you as a trainer will have a pretty good idea of their natural preferences. And, I kind of make this akin because I'm an O&M instructor. I'm sure there are O&M instructors in this room that have been just traveling when not working in this world. And you will pass an individual on the street walking with a white cane, holding said cane in a diagonal technique with the tip roughly 2 inches above the ground and walking at a really nice pace, right? Nobody's ever seen that before, I'm sure. I'm the only person that's ever seen that. And it just goes to show that you can teach two-touch technique and you can teach all the proper things about O&M, and the client is going to choose what is most comfortable for them in their situation and whatever. And that's just my favorite example of it. And it's one that never fails because every time I share it, and I've been an O&M instructor since '04, right? So a few years, but I was in rural Iowa, for goodness sake. Like, it's not like there were tons of people around. And man, when I was in Iowa, Wisconsin, Illinois, Chicago, DC, wherever I was like, I have to let this one go. But for me, it's been very instructional to remind me when I'm teaching technology or when I'm teaching anything, the user is going to choose their preferred way. And if I want to make them more efficient, I better work around that a little bit and take the academic hat of this is the best way to do it off every now and then. Sure, it's the best way, but if they never use it, it's not the best way. So we have to acknowledge that. I stopped. Right. Well, sometimes if you even approach people, they get upset. So I let that one go. So, all right, on. Make sure I'm in the right window so when I click my mouse, it does things. So we talked a little bit about desktop. If your desktop is messy, it can be a problem. And we're talking about your digital desktop, not your real world desktop. That's between you and whoever your boss, supervisor, or your conscience is. Applications generally shouldn't be on your desktop. They should be in an application folder because your computer organizes things in that way. That's one of those native things. Putting shortcuts on your desktop, absolutely, very useful. And in fact, I've mentioned on more than one occasion, I use a certain program service called Steam. And that service, every time I load a program, says, would you like to put a shortcut on your desktop? And I'm like, no, that's good. I can click into your interface and push the button. I don't need to do that. But for those of us working in the area of assistive technology, where we need to get better access to things and we don't want to jump through some of those hoops, putting a shortcut on the desktop and giving said shortcut a hotkey, or naming or renaming that shortcut something that allows us to get to it quickly, that makes sense to us. Think for a moment about clients that may have cognitive issues or may have certain memory issues and association. Outlook may not be as good as, I don't know, what would we rename Outlook? I know one of you has done it before. I know for a fact. Mail, right? And a semicolon email. So you can just type A and it'll say A email. Very nice. And that's the other thing, is whenever we're working on files and organizing them, we should remember that alphanumeric organization is useful. You may notice when you download the slides and everything for this class, right, that, like the PowerPoint presentations are Su17.T2, and then the name of it. Because when I open the folder, I want all of those presentations in alphanumeric order, in order of use, so that I can reference things and adjust things, move it from this setting to that setting, and do all of that organization. I want to use the computer's native organization techniques to my benefit for my use of it there. And so we can rename things and those shortcuts. The other thing that you can put on your desktop, I'm not here to say that, like, never put anything on your desktop, because I don't know. I don't even know what's on my desktop right now. I haven't looked at my desktop on this computer for a little bit. It's probably, I hope it's reasonably clean. There's a couple folders or a couple files that I haven't used in a bit. Some downloads, a couple screenshots. There's like 1, 2, 3, 4. I've got 6 things on my desktop. That, when I get a little downtime, I'm going to go through and I'm going to mess with them. Whoops. Sorry, I just realized that I accidentally hide PowerPoint. Let me reshare that. Didn't realize that interface worked that way. It's a tired face. 3 days of roller derby. I'm rough, but thank you. That's right. It booms my face up into the whole thing when you lose a slide. I forgot about that. So it's good if you have folders, because that desktop is always present. You don't have to dig down. You can put the file on your desktop to file away later, or you can take a file and put a shortcut to it right on your desktop so you have quick access. So your desktop's a good place for items in progress. The other thing I want to note is the desktop is probably one of our greatest assets in training. The desktop, if it is clean and blank, is an amazing training space for us to have a blank slate, a reasonably safe space where we can move files, copy files, delete files, move through the naming of them. We can create new documents. We can create copies of documents and HTML, links to different websites on there. And, we can populate it with a dozen folders that say, keep me, trash me, keep me, trash me, all the way through it, and let people navigate through it. The desktop is an excellent space if well organized. And if it isn't well organized, all you have to do, folks, create a new user. In fact, I always, when I'm working with individuals in a training environment, if I'm using my own machine, which happens on occasion, I was in a school district where everyone thought they would never buy apples. And so my student had an Apple at home and wanted to learn to use Mac OS, but the school didn't have them, so I had to teach on my personal machine. Just create another user on that machine. I've always had a separate user on my machines called student that has nothing but a blank slate and a new login. And in fact, when OSs update, creating a new user called student or test will give you a approach to that environment that is far cleaner and far nicer than obviously a lot of us are probably populating and moving all of our stuff, including our settings and a lot of other things forward. Having a blank user so that you know what default settings are and so that that person has a safe space to work. Occasionally too, if you have an individual that's going to be using a home computer and a significant other that shares that computer, I think to an old family friend who decided somewhere in his late 40s, early 50s that Dvorak was right for him, and went to using Dvorak. And he didn't need a Dvorak keyboard because he's a touch typist in Dvorak. But then when his wife would use the computer and she would forget to log him out and log into her interface, right, she'd be looking at a QWERTY keyboard and be typing Dvorak on the screen, and drove her a little mad. So it's not perfect, but we can have separate settings for different users all over the place. And computers today, even mobile devices today, handle that so much better. iOS stuff don't have multi-user yet, do they? I know some of the Android things have multi-user. Correct me if I'm wrong. You have multi-user on Android, depending on the version, doesn't it? I seem to remember my brother-in-law having it locked down. Okay, why Apple hasn't done that, I'm not sure. Because multi-user mobile devices would seem to be the right answer for schools, wouldn't it? Especially if you can feed out the user settings. Who knows? Apple's strange in the things they do. So again, that desktop, aside from all of those features, is a great training space in which we can work with individuals on how to feel more comfortable where they live. So the system settings, because it's so annoying, I wrote them all here. Windows is control panels. Mac OS X, I leave the X off. I know the Apple people yell at me when I'm at conferences and they're like, you forgot to say OS X. I'm like, I don't work for you. I can leave the X off. You guys can't. Go ahead and say it. I can say Mac OS. It's called System Preferences. Ubuntu is called System Settings. Chrome, iOS, and Android are all just settings. And at the end of the day, when you really think about Chrome OS, and actually I should put Chrome OS on that so people don't confuse it with the browser. I'll have to update that. You think about it, Chrome OS runs more like a a mobile device than it does a full-on desktop laptop machine. It uses more. They have taken the. Derek saying, I believe in the latest version they have taking. Oh, the X off in Mac OS. Really? I'd have to look at my laptop. It was a big deal back in the day. I remember being lectured at one point when I was presenting for Apple, and they were like, "You've got to say X," and I'm like, "You don't pay me." I'm sometimes a little bit of a. No, you're right. They took it off. It says Mac OS Sierra. Huh. Okay, never mind. I can't make that joke anymore. Darn it. They're taking all my good material. Idiosyncrasies of corporate America are always fun to pick on. No need to update the slides. Thanks, Trish. That's great. There is still control panel in Windows, but Windows, I'm assuming you're saying 10, Tiffany, opens the settings. Okay, I'm gonna have to dig that out, and maybe you guys can help me. Does Windows 10 still have a control panel as well, but it has some different function? Yes, Ryan. Someone like, is control panels more for your audio, video, monitor settings, your kind of input-output device settings, and then settings are more, deeper level. Is that how it? That's how I would organize it. Okay, thank you, Ryan. Settings is more basic control panel. So I'll just put here control panels and settings because that doesn't make it more confusing. All right. Sounds like I really need to get my hands on a Windows 10 machine, doesn't it? So I do have to. It has a lot of the same stuff. It always dead, and the settings has is easier to get to certain settings. I think that's why they were trying to do is make them more visible. Kevin asks, will you speak about indexing? Is that a merge between file hierarchy and file search? Yeah, sure. Real quick about indexing. What indexing is it's actually, think of a spreadsheet, right? Indexing is the spreadsheet that lives underneath your operating system interface. And it is the communication method that the computer uses to know where everything is. And that's just the way a computer organizes information on the hard drive. Indexing is kind of more of a metadata level. It's spreadsheets upon spreadsheets upon spreadsheets. Like, you can't even really display it. Think of it like a solid cube of spreadsheets where there are boxes everywhere. I don't know, those of you that are like me and grew in the 80s, it looks like a stack of electron cubes in the old Transformers. It's just a big cube matrix. And in all those little boxes about the given row and area now is additional information. Do certain keywords happen there? Is it this type of file? What date was it done? Where all of these little minuscule information about the information. Every time you write a new file, and periodically, when a computer indexes, it goes through, it's just running in the background all the time. Like, good modern indexing is always running. And when you create a new file and say you use a given new word, 10 times. We'll take something from my life as an example, right? So right now I'm conducting a lot of research on a form of motivation survey tools for cognitive research. And I just downloaded 2 or 3 research papers onto my computer from that area. And there are words in those files that were nowhere on my hard drive. I know this because those 3 files I downloaded were in German. My computer would look through those files and see the common use of words in there, and it would be picking out the major topical keywords of those files and then looking at the other files. And then it's like, oh man, these 3 files all have these words, and a lot of them. I should probably be able to organize this in case Sean wants me to look for all of a sudden. And it will be running in the background a search across everything on my hard drive to see if those words show up anywhere else. So that if I do happen to type one of those in a search, boom, it will find it. Or if you happen to search for a word and it's the first time, it may take a little longer, it may chug a little, but it's making note of all of those places where it can find it. Adobe saying all traditional settings are there, only definition of categories may be confusing. Doug says, me too, can you write a letter to my wife about indexing? What? Does a librarian index card set of cabinets analogy help? Yeah, Adobe, I think, yeah, if you really think about it, the library, the card catalog, the card indexes, except like the face on the box can have a billion different categories. Oh, Doug's saying, need a Windows 10 PC, tell my wife. Yeah, I need a new iPhone. Every time I unplug it from a power thing, it just cycles on and off, and I can't solve it. I need a new iPhone, actually. Yeah, and okay, I got it, Kevin. I guess I can actually post this video and not delete that section. It's hard to conceive of indexing because metadata today is so fine-grained, and the computers are doing such complex organization of that data so that we can work more efficiently. It really kind of boggles our mind. And yeah, it's hard to, when people talk about metadata, I'm always keeping an ear out on the metadata thing, because I feel like a lot of times when I go to like major things in the Office of Special Education Programs and whatnot in DC for grants and whatnot, that occasionally only about half the people really get metadata. And the only reason I understand it is I'm a mathematician. So complex layered matrices was part of my undergraduate degree. So I've got a little edge on it, and I've read a little too much Michio Kaku, frankly, for my own good. All right. I think I covered these. I probably covered too much earlier, but these next few slides are gonna boil down. These are to make sure I hit the points I want. In utilities, we have our disk repair. We have our system restore. Careful with that system restore thing, right? That's a dangerous button to push. When I was talking about utilities, that could be, oh God, that's one of them. You can restore your whole computer back to the way it originally was. Yeah, that's probably a good reason why a lot of IT people don't want their utilities completely open. Disk defrag, and we've talked a lot about what disk defragmentation does, what it looks like, and what it can and cannot do. We've also probably shared a little too much about how you might be able to use disk defrag in nefarious ways. But, you know, whatever. Oh God, the geese are back. Every once in a while, geese decide that they're going to take up house across. Hopefully they'll be quiet. Cleanup tools. The purpose of cleanup tools is to go through and look for broken links, information that may be hanging up, things like McAfee, I forget what the one is called on my Mac. Mac something or other. It's got a defragger. It goes through and it looks for rogue files that were left on my computer from when I installed new software. Little bits of files that are left over here and there and kind of hanging out. And it just makes sure all of that stuff is good. You know, when you download something, it's not always clean. And depending on what it is, it may leave little bits about, or those little bits that are left about may have been left about intentionally, so that they can do nefarious things. There's an really important utility, and it's called a command prompt, aka on the Mac side, and I think it's also on Ubuntu, called Terminal. And I don't think Chrome OS, I'll have to look now that I actually have Chromebooks. I don't know that Chrome OS has a terminal, because I don't think they want you doing that. What this is, for those of you who lived in the days of DOS, this is a prompt that allows you to run your computer at the command level line. So not using the GUI interface, but instead typing in certain secret words and codes and abbreviations to make your computer do stuff that you might be a little more awkwardly or completely incapable of doing in your regular OS interface. And command prompt and terminal are very powerful. They are not things for the meek. You can type in commands that will do dangerous stuff like system restore or change how your computer can work. So you're thinking to yourself, okay, Sean, this is really dangerous stuff and really powerful stuff and not something I'm necessarily familiar with. Why are you talking about it? That seems dangerous. There's a presumption that the CADIS will be much more technically capable and familiar. And there are some problems that will happen when you install software or assistive tech or other things for which your computer won't necessarily like the first run. And as such, sometimes there are solutions where you can fix it from a command prompt solution. And you may be able to find those solutions online. Be careful. Use a reliable source. Use articles that are only published by the particular companies. Be careful with third-party solution websites. But occasionally, like when I was originally doing 3D printing, my desktop and the program that I ran my 3D printing from got locked. And it was locked hard, and I wasn't going to be able to do 3D printing anymore because something was wrong. The solution I got from the company involved going into a command prompt and typing in several commands to clean out some temp files and some background running things so that everything would communicate well and I could update the program. There was a bad loop there, okay? And we might need to do that on occasion. So nobody knows what the future holds for how our computers are going to work. So I say we need to become a little familiar with it. Reading up a little bit on it. If you have that A+ manual, there's some stuff in there on it. It's just a good idea for us to be more familiar. And Adobe's just saying, he's had system recovery issues in Windows 8 and 10 that needed command prompt level to be resolved. So yeah, we need to be okay with that. And for those of you who don't even know what I'm talking about, look in your utilities, find that thing. When you can run programs, you can go into command prompt and you can launch programs from there. I've run emulation software that all runs from the command prompt, and I've had to rework. I had an Atari 2600 emulator on my old Mac when it was running Mac OS 8. And in order to load all the ROMs and everything, I had to go through a whole bunch of command prompt stuff to create a file architecture and everything so it would talk. But I wanted to play E.T. on the Atari 2600 and Raiders of the Lost Ark, right? It took me back. It took me back. The final one here is the activity resource monitor. And I talked about that a little bit before, that if something's wrong, if your computer's slow, if things aren't working the way you would like them to, going in there and taking a look at what's happening, and if you see something that looks nefarious or unusual or you don't know what it is, doing a quick web search on it with the keywords of activity or resource monitor and then the given run thing, you can read up on it a little bit and maybe find out why that's going on. Tiffany's saying back in college we used with Telnet to log into our shell accounts. Yeah, I remember the good old Telnet days. BBSs for life, right? BBSs for life. I know what our coming back from the break question is now. Thank you, Tiffany. So talking about, actually, I'm looking at the time at 7:26. I want to take our break here. The rest of this stuff here is going to kind of blaze through on applications and some of the more OS level stuff. And I want to be mindful if people have to go to the bathroom, get a drink of water, all those other things. I'm aware I need a drink of water. Yes, Kevin, my ribs feel much better. Today it was my back pelvic bone that I fell on. So, you know. So we're going to take a 10-minute break and then come back and move right through the rest of this. But I think so far I feel like this is being good and useful, that we're hitting a broad enough topic of this stuff that it isn't wasted time and people are able to voice up both their knowledge, share their knowledge, as well as ask these good questions. So keep them coming. We need those good questions because that lets us know we're talking about things and we're covering them well. So I'm going to pop up my Google timer for 10 minutes. And it's going. And we'll come back in 10 and get through the rest of this. So let me switch over to that share and have a break. So applications, right? That's where we were? Yes, we're at applications. Applications need to be subdivided into the built-in software and the stuff you put on your computer. Mainly because built-in software is what you get out of the box. And it's important to note that built-in software just works better, right? It's already built in. The people who made that computer, that's what they make. And so it handshakes. Generally, it involves some form of productivity suite. Microsoft Office would be an example of a productivity suite. So it would be your desktop word processor. It would be your presentation software like PowerPoint. It will be your spreadsheets like Excel. And that's pretty much the basic makeup of those software suites. And those three things will export and import things nicely. You can move things around them. And, you know, everyone's got a different productivity suite. I just named that one because I'll name a lot of other ones in a minute. You will have an email application, and an email application that will generally run natively on your computer, and for which it will try and organize everything and will generally be tied into either your settings or your web browser in some way. Because frankly, when you're doing different work, those two things go together a lot. Which brings you to some form of web browsing app, whether it is Edge or Internet Explorer or Safari or Chrome browser or Firefox or Opera. I think that's a pretty good list right there. And that's just what you cruise the internet using, what you search things out and everything. And then the modern application OS will generally Adobe just said Microsoft doesn't build in productivity software. You have to buy those separately. They don't load it on new machines. I know if you're an organization that's building a machine, you will have to buy licensing for it. But I was under the impression that when you buy like a new machine at a Best Buy or through, I don't know, whoever you're buying it through these days, that that you get a license for that productivity suite, at least in the short term. Is that not true right now? I live in a fantasy world. I live in Apple world where everything's free and updates. So that is still true, Diana. And Adobe, I totally hear as a system builder, I totally hear what you're talking about, because if you're building your own 3-month trial versions or works. Thank you for clarifying that. And we're going to talk a little bit about alternatives as well. And then more often than not, within your built-in software, computers are having some form of store, some form of way of buying other applications and installing other applications on your computer. And that really that's a new thing, right? That's really hit the world fairly recently and has become just a ubiquitous feature of technology more recently. And it's something that, in 2 years, kids won't know that didn't exist. It was just, they will have no idea. You bought software at the store? You mean you could buy programs at Walmart? Who knew? Now, when it comes to loading new software, it's important to acknowledge that we've transitioned, many of us, judging from the backgrounds, ages, and experiences, from the time in which we load things using physical media, like never, to using mostly online downloads. I do say, however, or in some form of proprietary store. And it's important to acknowledge as well that if you aren't using the native store of your operating system, that the form of a store has gone beyond the operating system side to the point at which I think Adobe has a store now, don't they? Where you can buy different packs and updates and everything else for their programs internally. And that's kind of managed through the Adobe launcher. You have things like Steam. You have other third-party things that are their own stores into themselves. And those stores are nice in that there's some assumption or presumption, not always true, that there's a little more security or there's some form of screening of the software beforehand. Not to say that piracy people and people who steal money aren't getting really good. My dad last week downloaded or hit a link on his iPad, mind you, that said that his iPad had been infected and he needed to download this screen protection software. And he went, oh God, I better do that, with a monthly service fee of like $12. And all of the information they sent had the exact same template and appearance as everything that would come from the iTunes Apple Store. It was really hard for me to detect that this was completely bunk and he should be putting a no pay on it. It was basically a scam where he went onto some website that had a pop-up window, and that pop-up window said you're infected and directed him to a link, and that link looked exactly like the iTunes Store and collected all of his information. Yikes. And then only because, and I think it was an iTunes Store purchase, which is the only reason I got an email about it, because we're on a family share plan so that I see what happens for everyone on my family online. It was really good. It was a really good one. And I even opened up the thing on the Apple Store, and it looks like Apple isn't aware that company is a little illegitimate. It was a VPN third-party VPN client for like guising what you're looking at, for people who bring their iPads to work and they don't want their employer knowing they're on the Wi-Fi and they're looking at something. Those of us who work in schools, you've seen those where people use a relay. But needless to say, loading software, loading new software, we live in a more secure world, but also a world that is more direct. iOS is not impenetrable because if you can program it using HTML5, Angelus, you can still trick someone. And Apple will probably find that thing and shut it down if it's being used in that way. But Apple is no longer impenetrable. They're too big. They're a target too. The Android is major market, but not the big ugly. Like there was a time when no one messed with Apple because no one cared. Apple had like 0% share, and half the hackers used Apple anyway. Nowadays, everyone likes to dislike Apple and are loving the Android thing because it's more open source. So generally, hackers don't like the more closed systems, or they like them because it's a challenge, but that's what they attack. And then generally, the applications folder is somewhere on your computer, and that is where all of your programs go. Understand if you have multiple users on your computer, you can divvy that folder up, as well as your computer may have an applications folder for a specific user, as well as an application folder for all users. And depending on your operating system and your divvying up of things and the permissions, that's something you can kind of play with. Like when my kids have a login on our computer at home, they've got their own application folder that's just on their side of it, and they don't get my, 80 applications for doing just about a little bit of everything, because I don't want them opening some of those things. I'd rather them not playing with it. They can do damage to a computer with some of the different programs I have, like that we've talked about as well. We talked about the file architecture. We talked about multiple users. The one thing I want to talk about real quick is your downloads folder. In the modern era, with so much stuff being downloaded so frequently, clean that thing out periodically. It's a good idea. Put things where they belong. Just don't leave them in the downloads. I'm as bad as anyone. But also, file architecture, we have cloud-based tools as well, which is a blessing because we can share things. They're backed up. They're not on our computer. We don't lose them if we lose them. Is a curse because it's another folder somewhere that is an entirely different file architecture, which means we end up with redundancies, and blessing and a curse. And we talked a little bit about having multiple users. Each user may have divvying up of the given resources in their computer, similar to applications. Like say you've got 2 different users on your computer and they both have different iTunes music folders. You won't necessarily be able to go to each of them unless you put that folder in a place both people can access and read write. Important to know. The doubling of the cloud-based stuff or the music and things. The cloud-based stuff, there's tricks that he knows. One thing you could do is have your cloud-based stuff sitting there, and then, well, one way you can do is you can use smart folders. So you can use folders that grab certain materials and put them in there. The other thing you can do is you can use aliases or shortcuts of the folders in your cloud and put those shortcuts in your different document folders so that you never actually access that information through your cloud base. The danger of that, however, is you don't necessarily have the mental check of which things are totally shared and totally not. And that even happens in your cloud if you are working within Teams with Dropbox and whatnot. You can be dropping something in a folder and forget that everything in that folder is shared with an entire team. And you may be working on a conceptual project that you don't really want to share with everyone yet, but it fits the heading and everything of that particular folder. So you're like, yeah, I'll put it right in there. Oops, you just shared it with everyone already. So, I'm kind of cautious about getting rid of that doubling, Kevin, or advising people to, because in this day and age where information flows all over the place, it's not a bad idea to have that doubling, have that conscious acknowledgement of when you're putting things in a shared place. Hope that kind of answers it. We covered all that. Most of the deleting files. There's one thing here that I want to acknowledge, and you can delete files with hotkeys. I expect a lot of people do. It's a lot easier than dragging that thing down to the corner. I don't know. I hate using my mouse. So ever since I've come to this field, I don't use my mouse for anything if I can help it. When it goes in there, it's out of use. It's important to understand that if you are trying to get rid of a file and it is advised that you drag it to the trash to take it out of use, so like a new temp file may be made somewhere for a program or whatnot, you can just rename it and leave it where it is. Remember that programs know to look for certain files based upon that file's name. So if you add the word old, all in capitals, to the beginning or end of a file name that is a critical file and you want to find out if it's doing something, guys, this even works with viruses. Like, if you just rename the virus's file, it's broken because the virus doesn't know to run that part of the program. Broken. And like, that's a good way of checking things now and then. Remember that when you're deleting files that you actually push delete, when you put it in the trash, it's not gone, it's still taking up hard drive space. So you have that extra step. I want to talk about navigation conveniences real quick, because we talked about them a little bit earlier. And in utilities, like an example of a navigation convenience would be when you're in the Finder on Mac OS. We'll talk about a few other ones on the other side. If you press Command-Shift-U, it will open up your utilities. If you're in VoiceOver, you press the VoiceOver keys M for menu, S will get you to your VOMS. M is menu, and then S will take you to system preferences, won't it? Adobe, how to get to a virus file, that's a whole different bag. You would have to find the name of the process running in your system monitor, and then it'll tell you what that program is running, and then you need to search your computer for that particular file and where it's running, and then you can rename it. Again, though, that's dangerous stuff, but you seem pretty capable. That you can generally hunt down those files or look for the files that are being used by it, and then you can just rename it, because at its core, a computer can't do anything unless it knows its name, and it's just a string of characters. If that string is altered, it doesn't know where to look. So you can hunt down. It's a pain in the butt, but you seem like the type of person that might do that, Adobe. That may be a trait we share. So maybe we can talk about more too. I haven't done it in a while. It's probably been 12 years since I've hunted down a worm. So I haven't done it recently, and a lot's changed in 12 years. Command space on the Mac OS opens up Spotlight, and you could just type in the word utilities, right? That's the same as the search in Windows. You can mouse click Command N for a new window, and then go to Applications, Utilities. Or at the very top of the screen on Mac in your Finder, there's just a menu called Go, and it's right there. For system preferences, Command Space for Spotlight, SYS. There you go. So there are these different features on Windows. You know, if you want to open utilities, you just press the Windows key U. Done. You can do Windows R for Run and type utilities. It'll go. Oh, you're right. Command Space. Wait. Command Space Launch is Siri in the latest update. Right. It's not Command F5. Correct? No, it's a triple click. I don't have one of those keyboards, I think. I think it's Command Space 2 times in rapid succession is Siri in the latest update, isn't it, Derek? I'll look at that. Thank you for correcting it if I'm off on that. I think I've got things. Yeah, that's not doing it on mine. Maybe I don't have the latest update. I'll keep rolling. Press the Windows key and do your search. Mouse click. I must not be updated. Okay. And you can, in command prompt, if you type in cmd/admin, you get utilities. So there's that, if you want to really be a junkie and you want to play with that. For control panels, Windows X, Windows W to search the settings. You can mouse click Windows, Control Panels, or Win R, which is your run, and you just type control panels. It'll go in there. This is the only place I can put this. It seems like I'm jumping around a bit, and I am, because I have to close a lot of doors on operating systems. But I want to talk really quickly about email, because email is this ubiquitous thing that we all have, and some of us love to hate. You know, I think my personal email gets somewhere around 50 messages a day. I don't know which listservs I somehow ended up on, how or why, but it's gotten pretty bad, and my university is frankly even worse about it. Yeah. But there are several types of email, and depending on the client will depend on how it works, and because you are a person that might have to do IT type things, you need to know about it. Sorry, I'm forgetting to drink my water. So the most, I won't say most common, but almost every form of email interface has some form of web access today, because you need to be able to be mobile. This used to be a new fancy feature. And what it does, it's a browser mail interface. It allows you to read and update your email. And it's important to understand that when you're doing it through a web access, you are reading and updating what's directly on the server. You're changing what's right there. And a few of you may be thinking, well, isn't that what I'm always doing when I do my email? Not so much. We're going to have fun with this. In order to use web access, you do have to have an active internet access, which isn't that big of a deal today. I mean, where people are using their phones to interact with this class, like, it's not what it used to be when internet access was rare and expensive and slow. But we'll kind of take a walk down memory lane about internet access as we look at some of these things here. There was this thing, it still is, called a POP3 server, and POP stands for Post Office Protocol. And what it does is your mail messages get downloaded and deleted from the server. So you're running a program on your computer that is a POP3 receives your email. And when you use the POP3 protocol, or the POP3 POP protocol, POP, it is protocol. I hate it when acronyms have the actual word that you want to use to describe the process. It's horrible. The program is accessing the internet or whatever interface to log into the server. It's downloading all of your messages and deleting them all from the server and putting them all on your local machine. And then everything's gone. It's exactly like the mailbox in front of your house. When you think POP, think mailbox. That's why it's called the post office protocol, because it behaves the same way. It's an older protocol. It was developed in the 80s, and the idea behind it was that not everyone stayed connected to the internet all the time, and you didn't want files moving around in duplicate all over the place, right? So you logged in, you pulled everything down to your machine, everything lived on your machine, you read everything, you deleted everything, and then if you needed to send something, the next time you connected to the internet, those emails would fly out. That's what I used when I was in grad school here at NIU in 2002, because I didn't really have a strong internet connection at home, nor could I afford it, to be frank. So I would do all my email. I would go to the student center where there was an open internet connection, and I would Ethernet in, plug my laptop in, and I would hit go, and all my messages would go up, all my messages would come down. If I had time to answer the rest of my email, I would. Otherwise, I'd take my laptop, throw it in my bag, and go home. And my route to come into where I had classes always went through somewhere where I could Ethernet in. And I frequently unplugged lab machines so that I could do it, because there certainly wasn't Wi-Fi floating around everywhere, where I could plug in, grab my email, and then go on my merry way. So it was not that bad. An IMAP server, which also was developed in the 80s, just a couple years later, is this thing called an Internet Message Access Protocol. And IMAP works differently. And generally, when you set up a new email account, well, to be frank, almost everything's using some form of IMAP now. There's not a lot of POP3 floating around. It is an option, actually. And when you set these things up, you can make these choices on how to handle your messages. With IMAP, your messages are downloaded, but there's a copy of that message on the server. So what happens in IMAP is the server checks your local folder and compares it to the server. And if your local folder is missing anything, it puts it on there. If you've deleted something in your local folder, it knows that you downloaded it and it is flagged, oh, that's been deleted. It then deletes it from the server as well. And so it just is constantly syncing back and forth every time they're connected, and it pays attention to the file history and what happened, so it knows to do it on the other end. You know, likewise, if you download a folder on your computer, you log in using the web access and you delete that folder on the server, the next time you connect to your computer, it will see that there was a file deletion log later than that, and it will delete it out of your mail folder. If you're, you know, a clever little bird, you can do that on the web access side, but also move that file out of your email folder, right? Because it only knows to look inside that email. It doesn't know to go look in your documents or in a folder called saved emails that I never want to delete. Boom, there it is. So it always is syncing things. It's always checking in. And both of these happened in the 80s, and they were opposing philosophies of it. The thing about IMAP is there's a lot more communication and a lot more folder going back and forth. And with POP3, it was using a philosophy of the mailbox. And that was the framework we were using for email. It was like a mailbox. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to treat it like a mailbox. Things evolved from there. Now, there's also Exchange, and you guys are probably familiar with this. It's Microsoft's version of IMAP. Why is this important? Well, we saw the computer usage data for the world. Exchange, Microsoft has a lot of the market, right? It's called MAPI. Sometimes it's called ActiveSync. Sometimes it's called Microsoft Exchange. It's just Microsoft's version of IMAP. And that's important because if you have a business or something operating under IMAP, you need to make sure that you are using a email program that operates effectively under IMAP and doesn't have any communication errors with it. And that's just important to make sure you've got everything up to date. If you are using like an antiquated email program and you haven't updated it forever because, hey, it works, and for some reason you are using a newer protocol or the protocols have shifted, things could get a little messy. By and far, IMAP's pretty much right for everyone in our internet day and age. Most people are getting it, but if you are in a rural area where you don't have strong internet and you are just logging in, logging off, checking in, checking out, you want to try and keep your usage of your data on that plan to a minimum, you might want to think about using POP3. And at the same time, occasionally when you are somewhere like at a library or somewhere else where you have internet access where you're not writing that line, then going through and looking for files. You want to be cautious with POP3. If you're being cautious about data, almost everything has an attachment these days. And those attachments, even the little icons and the pictures, they take up data. Kevin's asking, why do many Braille CPUs offer all of these to accommodate the user? It seems to create a ton of problems for us in school districts. Well, all three of these are active currently in the market. They're all there. If you use, like, depending on the machine, certain mail services prefer given ones. And what's been happening more and more, this is certainly true on the Mac side with the Mac Mail program. I've seen it with Outlook as well, that you don't see the choice of these because if you're using Microsoft, you're using Exchange. That's it. If you're using your own email or if you're using like a school email, well, the people at the school have the option of doing this stuff. And then by and far, they don't have their own email engine. So unless you happen to be a Microsoft institution, like an Office 365 institution, you have these options. It's confusing, and if you don't know what you're plugging in, it can be a bit of a headache. But because schools aren't major corporations, they've got a lot of open sides of it. Now, this is probably Kevin, this is the slide you want. Because a lot of this has become a lot easier if you type in, this is our, you and me both. This is my web service. Here's my email. It'll auto detect if it's a Google or if it's a Microsoft or if it's an Apple, and it'll set it up. But you can still get under the hood. And if you pop the hood, you need a few things. You need an account name. You need a username. You need your password for that account. And then you need a couple other things, like the incoming mail server, the outgoing mail server. Generally, the incoming is called mail, and the outgoing is normally something like SMTP. And then generally your security settings. So there may be a certain port it uses or a security 3-digit number that you have to put in there. You need that information if you're going to set it up yourself. Now, here's the good news, Kevin. You can generally find a lot of this information through online resources if you're talking about something like Google or AOL or Apple or I don't know. You can request this information from the IT staff, and then immediately they will go, what are you doing? And you're like, well, I've got this Braille device I've got to put mail on. They're like, well, why are you doing that? just use the web access. And you're like, yeah, that web access kind of sucks. It's not really accessible. It'd be great if my student could just use his Braille device. He's kind of blind. Likes to use Braille. Seemed like it was a no-brainer. I don't know how we do that. They'll get all twitchy. I only say this not to, by any way, to defame IT people. I've been down this road. I went down it when iPads came out, and everybody was superstitious, and IT did not want them on the network or using any network resources for that matter. Kept 3 kids, different districts and schools who have their own Wi-Fi. Yeah. Now, here's the good news, Kevin. If you can find someone who already has an account set up, a teacher, a friend, another student, someone within the district, and they have their email, if you open up their email settings, you don't need their password. That'll be guised. Usernames are helpful because generally from the username you can extrapolate another user's username by seeing how many initials, letters first, letters last, what it is. The account name is something you put on there generally. The incoming mail server and the outgoing mail server will generally be the same. The only time it's different is if the organization with schools occasionally will put student accounts and teacher accounts in different silos so there's no crossover. So occasionally the mail servers will be different, but generally the security settings will be the same. IT people are occasionally lazy. They could change them and make them different, but why bother? No one's looking under the hood anyway. So if you have another account or you have a teacher account in there, you can look at your teacher account, pull up that information, and then get it. If you're a TVI who's itinerant, I've done this before, I've requested an email that operates within the school district for the trumped up excuse of I need to communicate with other teachers, and they generally, I don't want my emails getting bumped. So I want to be able to put this email thing on my computer. I need an account. They'll give it to you a lot of times. I've shown up for schools and I've gotten IDs. I just show up for picture ID day out of nowhere, and I walk through and tell them, and I get my staff ID. I'm not supposed to because I'm not building staff. I'm district staff, but whatever. I'm a TVI. I'm a rogue gun. You can get that teacher account, and then you can look at your account settings, so then you can set up your student stuff. It's worth a shot. I've had it work a couple times. Generally when I was working in rural Iowa, and actually when I was working in Wisconsin, it worked too when I was subcontracting. So that they tend to say, oh, well, that's a pretty good reason. We don't want your spam coming in from an outside thing. Cool, thank you. So email, more than you wanted to know, but enough to be useful and to investigate some things. The A+ manual has more, but I hope that wasn't completely over people's heads, or if it has, you've at least got enough to come back to this to investigate further. We're in a changing market with the email and the way things are setting up. A lot of the operating systems and email programs want to make it all simpler, mainly because they want to keep all your information. So hopefully that gets you there. That's a good idea, Trish. Trish gave a good piece of advice. The trick is having your student introduce themselves to the tech folks in the school. They'll never say no to the kids. No, you can't have email on your Braille device. Then how am I going to read it? Good question. Yeah, that's nice. I like that a lot, Trish. I have to say I've never gone that route. So, thank you. That's why I love having you guys in here. You guys all make us all better. So, chocolate. Now she admits why it really works. So Office applications. I kind of hit this. Word processing, making documents, formatting documents, editing documents, and then all those other things I call whistles and bells. All the Ooh, you can bend words and you can make them completely inaccessible. Isn't that awesome? Stuff we never use. There are more things in word processors that we are never, hardly ever going to use. That are, if you happen to be someone like me writing a dissertation, your headings and everything, and creating your own table of contents, cool. But most people aren't bothering with that. In presentations, you can create what we call, in the business of presentations, a deck. That comes from slides. If you're a photo slide person, you would create what is called a of cards, the slides, right? You put them in the slide projector deck. It's an artistic photography thing that all the chic people use for that. And then you're like, deck? What are you talking about? It's just the slides. You choose an appearance, right? And once you work in the field of visual impairments, your appearance is black background, white text. That's all I use. I used to do all the shiny, bright, cool stuff. Black background, white text. If it's good enough for Steve Jobs, it's good enough for me. Generally, I don't touch animations. And animations can be less accessible, but some people love them and they think sound effects and animations are really cool. Know your market, and know that if you have a student who is doing a presentation for their peers, and their peers are using them, have a feel for what the norm is. Talk to a teacher. Say, hey, are the kids all using sound effects and things? That'll help your student not feel like it's cool when we give presentations to each other and it's black on white and we're sure of ourselves and confident, and we're confident in front of the room. If you're working with a client or students in their first time, they want to fit in, and the teachers have expectations they may not share. I once here at NIU during my grad program, I was asked to give charts, and I'm the one person that drew out the histograms and everything by hand because I have a degree in mathematics and statistics specifically, and I got like a C on my charts and tables because I hand drew my histograms and they were far more precise, and I obeyed all the same rules, and mine looked like everyone else in the class. But I had done mine by hand with paper and pencil and a ruler, and they had done theirs on Excel, so they got a higher grade. So know what the norms are. I do take a moment. There's some great videos online about Bill versus Steve presentation styles. Bill Gates, Steve Jobs. Neither person is the epitome of it, but people use those comparisons a lot. And I was just looking around, and I just saw a TED Talk, actually, where someone talked about PowerPoint hell. It's very easy to get into a habit, and you may notice with my presentations, this is a busy one. There are 3 bullets, and generally my bullets don't have more than 3 to 5 items. I try and keep 3 to 5 words, 3 to 5 items across the board, so that what I'm sharing and engaging carries a lot of the content. Unless the content I'm sharing is a lot of information on the screen. But I cover that information, and it's more robust when I speak about it. And then you have something like spreadsheets, ways of organizing data and information. They have functions. They have other cool things that allow you to do math and re-aggregate your data and swing cells and all this other powerful stuff that, again, like 98% of the population never touches. But if you can organize your spreadsheet and write out a budget, you're doing pretty good. Now let's talk about who has what. Windows. The current version of Windows is Windows 10. The browser is Edge and Internet Explorer. I don't know, has Edge gotten more accessible? I've heard it's getting better, but I don't buy it until I see it and hear it. Thank you, Trish. Microsoft Store is the store for buying things. Their productivity suite, although we've already talked about it, it's far from free, is MS Office. And for documents, it's Word. For presentations, it's PowerPoint. For spreadsheets, it's Excel. Their screen reader is Narrator, and it is turned on by pressing the Windows key and Enter. Their magnification program is called Magnifier, and that is Windows key and plus. And if you want to find things under all programs, accessories, ease of use, or just press Windows Utilities. It's in there. And hopefully people were just talking about them reorganizing with control panels and stuff. Is that all programs, accessories, ease of use, hierarchy still accurate? And are the accessibility stuff still sitting there under ease of use in Windows U? Or did they change that in the newest version? Please help me stay up to date while I drink my water. People are clicking or writing. Okay, thank you, Adobe. Okay, so Windows U does open ease of access. Good. I just want to make sure. Hold on. Tiffany's just saying Windows U still works. Windows Enter is now going to be Windows Control Enter after this edition. I'll put a note in here. I can type Win Control Enter in near future. Thank you for that note. On Mac OS, current version is 10.12. I don't have the subletters on it. Is that still accurate? Hold on, let me see. Yeah, 10.12.4 is what I've got. So the browser is Safari. The Apple Store is their store. Their productivity suite, which is iWork, which is always free, is Pages, Keynote, and Numbers. And I love the fact that it's free because it was a bloody well headache for a long time. The screen reader is VoiceOver. It, depending on the computer, it is either Command F5 or triple click. What's that new key called? The the new button on the touchpad. Triple click. Triple click home. That's right. There it is. Yeah, it's the fingerprint thing. What is that button called? It's not the home. That's iOS, not Mac OS. It has a new special name. Triple click. I'll put fingerprint for now. No. We're in an area where there's a transition, right? They're transitioning to new technology in their keyboards, which has changed our world. Their magnification program is Zoom, the built-in one, mind you, with Option Command 8 Touch ID. Thank you. It is called Touch ID. And you can find these features in Apple System Preferences Accessibility. And now these are the built-in things. Obviously, there's another whole world of ours, which is what we add on. On Linux or Ubuntu, the current version is 16.04. The built-in browser is Firefox. The store is called the Ubuntu Software Center. Seems very sophisticated. The productivity that comes on it and is sort of runs native. It's not unique. As someone just mentioned, I run Microsoft products on my Mac products, but it's not the built-in. It's not the native, as it were. In fact, until what? It was 5 months ago. Careful. 5 months ago, Microsoft Suite became very accessible with VoiceOver. Fully, I don't know if Microsoft is fully accessible on Windows right now, to be perfectly honest. From the stuff I've been hearing from the field, it sounds like it's not fully accessible with Narrator or, on the iPad. They may not have gotten to that yet. But they did do a rebuild of the Microsoft Suite, and it is much more accessible now. Yeah, well, Microsoft always requires a steep learning curve, and I'm cited, and I've been doing this tech stuff for a long time, and I still can't find stuff. So back to Ubuntu though. The productivity suite is called LibreOffice. It is an open source office suite. You can run it on Mac, you can run it on Windows, you can run it on Ubuntu. It is not much like Microsoft. It is not unique versus, say, Pages. I don't think you can run Pages on Windows. So, you know, it's much more common and universal. The documents program is called Writer. The presentation program is called Impress. I think those are some pretty high expectations. And then the spreadsheets is called Calc, which I kind of like that. You're calculating. Their screen reader is called Orca, something that eats sharks. And you turn it on by pressing the Alt plus Super plus S. And yeah, Super, the Super key it's the Windows key, folks. There you go. They don't really have magnification. They just have themes. So when we talk about the layering of magnification, it's important to note that they just have what you can do at the OS level. So that's those three. Chrome OS I don't have in here because I just got my Chrome OS stuff. So I will have to, you don't do much downloading. I mean, it's the Play Store. A lot of Chromebox is built in. We'll talk about more of this stuff. But you know, it's Google Docs, right? I'll add a slide. There needs to be another slide in here. That's not the right one. And I'll add in it, but it is, you know, your Google Docs drive, where you have Docs sheets, and I forget what the presentation software is called. And then, you know, your native store is the Play Store or the Chrome Store, and your screen reader is Chromevox, and your magnification is your Chrome Zoom features, magnification features. I forget what they are named. I'm working on presentations in that area as I work through all this Chrome OS stuff down. I've only had my Chrome tools for about a week and a half. So I apologize. We all have our blind spots, but I'm working really hard to get independent and blindfold ready with Chrome OS, so that I can be a much better advocate in helping teachers in the field, since so many schools have gone Chrome. It's just a steep learning curve for me, coming from 3 or 4 other things. So I want to finish out all of this this session here in the next like 10 minutes with a quick run about universal design. And I bring this up as part of this OS software thing because universal design has become a very hot button topic in the last, I don't know, 5 years. I mean, it's been around longer than that, but it's become a real sexy term to use in education. Yes, I just said sexy in education. It happens. There are sexy things in mathematics, you know, sexy things in physics. Quantum theory is very sexy right now. And I've heard it used a lot around my university, and I've heard it used a lot really wrong around my university. So I wanted to take a minute and go through this because I'm hearing a lot of chatter from the field as well. And I think we need to frame it in a way that works for us well. And when I say us, I mean those of us who are going to be caddises in the field, the sort of people that different organizations are going to look to for accessibility testing, that different teachers in the field and professionals in the field are going to look to for expertise, as well as administrators are going to look for guidance and some level of security legally. So universal design, and this kind of, some of it takes us back a little bit to the joys of Allah and set model. We are looking at barriers to access. And the question when we are talking about universal access were the barriers to access considered? That's the first step. It certainly isn't there when they are considered, because then we have to answer whether or not they were actually addressed. And the big players, the big things that come up when it comes to barriers to access, and we've kind of talked about this a little before, and we'll continue. This will keep coming up. Are visual. Are there visuals that are required that an individual with a visual impairment might not be able to access, either because of font's contrast or the fact that they just can't see the screen? Sometimes having visuals is almost worse than not having them if you've formatted them poorly. Then is there auditory content? And auditory content, to be frank, wasn't as big of a deal until the entire world became like YouTube ready. And frankly, you can get on YouTube and look up and learn just about anything these days. You can find do-it-yourself projects and all kinds of things. If all of those instructions are given audibly, of course, there's an accessibility issue that's sitting there. And that has to be considered. Are there physical barriers? So universal design is not just a tech thing, okay? It's far broader than that. Universal design is a very large topic. And then also, are there complexity issues? It could be physical access to the technology. It could be physical access to, I can't open the door. And then are there issues around complexity? How complex is this interface? Is it intuitive? When I say it's intuitive, is it intuitive to everyone, or is it just intuitive to me and I designed it and I made it the way I want? That's an important question we have to answer. And then once you get in there, there are layers of design, right? Just saying it's universal design, in an operating system, the operating system is universally designed, but that doesn't mean all the software in the operating system is universally designed. It was years when Apple went to OS X and released VoiceOver. It was literally years before they made iTunes, one of their own software products, accessible. So just because the root is accessible doesn't mean the branches are, or that you can pick the apple. You can trip over the root, but that doesn't mean you can pick the apple. Hey, I just made that up. Is that good? Tell me if that's good. In textbooks, you can make textbooks accessible by offering them in digital files and everything else, but that doesn't mean that the instructional materials in the classroom are accessible, because that teacher may be writing something on the board. That teacher may quickly write out a quiz on a piece of paper, photocopy it, and then hand it to the class. Our educational materials are universally designed. Awesome, great to hear. Can you guarantee me that everything the teacher hands out in class and does in class is as well? Well, then you may not be accessible. Yeah, and the textbook diagrams people are working on that. That's a tough nut to crack right now. And the pictures, people try and get past it with an audible to scrim. That's tough stuff. And even so, we can look at this too. This layering happens with buildings as well. You may have a building that is universally designed accessible, and then a business moves in and rents that building space, and then they redecorate the interior and they redesign that space for their use. Maybe that building was, depending on the level of building code that they requested, they may have done stuff that wasn't required for a building code, But at the same time, some of how they place their tables in the business, if the tables aren't nailed down, they're movable, they could make the route to the bathroom inaccessible to a wheelchair based upon how they decorated the room. I've seen this in a lot of smaller business restaurants all the time. They're not very accessible, or they've redesigned it and grandfathered in, but the building itself was cleared a long time ago. So there's a break point in the universal design of the root or the core. And when we get one step away from the end user, it may not be universally designed anymore. And this came up at my university in that they were asking all the materials to be posted on Blackboard and that their books were X or Y. And then they said, okay, our classes are universal design. And this horrible thing happened. In fact, I think it happened while one of the people in the class was here. The Disabilities Resource Center and the university said, our classes have been universally designed, therefore, we don't need to provide accommodations because no accommodations are necessary. Shine your button, walk away. What? They took the meaning of universal design to mean that no accommodations would then be needed. That it was universally designed for everyone. And we're done. We're out, yo. Just like I talk about the UDL of this course, and yet my teaching is all verbal. And I could, if I ever had someone enroll in this class who was deaf and required that accessibility to be taken up a notch, I would have to hire someone to either closed caption what I'm saying in class actively, or I would have to make all of the videos closed caption accessible. If I made all the videos CC accessible, it would actually not be true universal design because the people in the class would not have an equal opportunity to participate. And I hope, you guys have all heard me talk about the importance of everything you say in class and everything that goes on here. I think that's an important part. And, someone even pointed out earlier that JAWS really doesn't like that chat menu. And you can see what's happening immediately as it happens, but if you miss it, going back is a bloody well headache, and it's not there. It was for a while, and actually, if you want good chat behavior, for those of you who are newer to the class, I've had several people who have completed this class say that NVDA handles this entire interface much better. And in fact, a lot of the Google resources and regarding a lot of the Google tools, if you're not using a Chromebook, say get NVDA. So food for thought. Now, the universal design principles follow these simple rules: equitable use, flexibility in use, simple and intuitive use, perceptible information, right? That's that access to info we're talking about. Tolerance for error, right? My son getting locked out of the iPad and me losing everything. Low physical effort, people with mobility or, gross or fine motor skills. And size and space for approach and use. And admittedly, I just gave examples that were technological, but obviously, think size and space for approachable use. Think of a wheelchair accessible button to get into a door. Now, these aren't necessarily the ones we're always going to deal with because there's another set, and that's universal design for learning. Because I just said, if it's universal design, is there no need for adaptation, and is there no need for accommodation? Like, does someone certify that? That's the thing. Like, my university said, no, we're universal design. It's like, oh, really? Who certified you as universal design? Where'd you get that button? Because that'd be great to hear about. Doesn't really exist. Now, if you want to learn a lot more about universal design principles and approaches, the people to talk to are CAST. They're out of Boston, And they really are the field leader in that they've pioneered a lot of this stuff around UDL. They've really pushed this term, the approach, the adoption. God, they've done the hard work. And there's a link in the Moodle shell with information about CAST, as well as where you can get access to the CAST Universal Design and Learning, kind of like textbook and manual. It's on their website. It is downloadable. I think if you want to download it, you can access it from the web in a web-based linked format. If you want to download it and work on it on your side, though, I think you have to buy it. I don't think it's really expensive, though. I've just used the web interface. I've tested it out with JAWS and VoiceOver, and I found it behaves well enough that I can easily navigate and get around it without any significant trouble. Now, I want to go back. Bergstaller theorized all of this in Universal Design of Instruction. And these were the Universal Design principles. This is where that list comes from. But then in that same article, she pulled the Universal Design principles and she changed them into principles specifically for learning. And this is why we're talking about it, folks. This is why it's the second to last slide. What is my last slide? Okay. So here are the Universal Design for Learning principles. Those other ones were kind of very global. This is specific to learning, and they are inclusiveness, physical access, delivery methods, information access. You can see that these very much connect to the other set of lists. Interaction, feedback, and demonstration of knowledge. And that last one, folks, you may notice in the way I do things, if you haven't produced anything, how do you know they learned something? So if you're going to create universal design principles for learning, we have to acknowledge that that end user can't just get in, can't just push play, listen, watch, get information, be receptive. They have to be productive. And I'll talk about that a lot, and I think I already have, that consumer versus producer. We have to consume educational materials, but in order to prove our learning, at some point we're going to have to produce something, whether it's answering the quiz, writing a paper, taking a test. So that demonstration of knowledge, if you can't demonstrate it, if you can't access the assessment, and I'll tell you guys, the first time I ran this course, I used some of the quiz elements. I thought they were kind of cool in Moodle. They turned out to be bloody well completely inaccessible, and I dumped them. And now I rail against things like Khan Academy and Achieve 2000 and some of these Achieve 3000, some of these other tools online that use different assessment methods because they're using elements that are by their very nature not entirely accessible for demonstration knowledge because the interaction and the feedback is poor. And so these are the tools we need to look at. This is the list we need to be approaching. And whenever we are evaluating something, when we're looking at a tool and looking at our students being able to get at it, or more generally reviewing a new tool, the interaction and feedback, some of the dynamic assessment tools, unfortunately, by their nature, are less accessible and or are problematic for how you analyze and demonstrate knowledge of those tools. And as a math person, a lot of my stuff falls into that category, specifically statistics and analysis. And yet, I think we should struggle against that and find new ways because we shouldn't be throwing that stuff out. And we're on the, right, and Adobe says, we're on the crux of a lot of new accessibility. Adobe says one of his concerns is whether the Cadence testing environment would be accessible. and they actually have a I think they have 5 machines. They have specific computers that you take it on, that where it lives on those machines and it's been tested and maintained within that environment. So it won't be a fresh environment. That's about as all I know of it. Adobe is apparently it's reasonably controlled. Okay, Kevin says yes, it's a local copy on a laptop, and you know, I think that probably is 2 or 3-fold, but that makes me feel a little better about it. People have expressed those concerns, I can tell you that, and you know, it's a mixed bag. But this assessment thing, accessible assessment, it's rough. I'm not going to say that we don't have to do the hard work and we don't need to be diligent, but when you look at these areas, we know what we have to look at to get there, and we need to touch these elements of this list. It's printed, it's documented, it's in the literature. So the last slide is just a bunch of resources for web accessibility standards and whatnot. ADA compliance, languages, the good, the bad, and ugly, Flash, Java, HTML4, 5, some stuff around that. I'll make sure to cover this slide next week. But thank you guys for staying a couple minutes over. Yeah, and WCAG 2.0. So we'll cover a lot more of that next week. We'll pull this last slide forward. And thank you guys for letting me go a little over. I apologize. Yes, there will be quizzes in this technology section. There just isn't week 1. I can actually, I'm trying to remember if there is for week 2. Hold on, let me peek behind the curtain and make sure I'm not sharing the front end of the curtain at the same time. Yes, there is a quiz for this week, and it will be posted when the video goes live, probably within the next day. Thank you guys. Thank you everyone. Have a good night. It's so much better with all of you. Thank you guys for speaking up and being active parts of this class. You guys make me better every week.